Stray dog enters a wedding ceremony. What happens next brings tears to everyone. It was a picture-perfect day for a wedding. The sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow over the sprawling gardens of the Davenport estate. Rows of white chairs lined the manicured lawn, their backs adorned with delicate ribbons and floral arrangements. At the center of it all stood an ornate archway draped in soft ivory fabric, framing a view of the sparkling lake beyond. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation as guests took their seats, murmuring quietly while a string quartet played softly in the background. Amelia, the bride, stood hidden behind the grand oak doors of the estate, her heart pounding as she adjusted the lace veil that trailed behind her. Today was everything she had dreamed of since she was a little girl, and now, as she prepared to walk down the aisle, she couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. Deep breaths, Amelia, her best friend and maid of honor, Sophie, said with a reassuring smile. "You're going to be stunning out there." Amelia nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her bouquet. Beyond the doors, she could hear the hum of the crowd, the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the soft notes of the quartet's music. She took one final deep breath, steadied herself, and signaled for the doors to open. As the grand doors swung wide, the chatter of the guests hushed, and all eyes turned toward Amelia. She stepped onto the stone path that led to the archway, her heart swelling with emotion as she saw her fiancé, James, waiting for her at the altar. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and she could feel his love radiating across the distance between them. But just as Amelia began her walk down the aisle, something unexpected happened. From the corner of the lawn, a scruffy stray dog trotted into view. Its matted fur and thin frame contrasted sharply with the elegance of the wedding setting. At first, the guests didn't notice, too focused on the radiant bride making her way toward the altar. But as the dog moved closer, its presence became impossible to ignore. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as the dog padded confidently up the aisle, its tail wagging as if it had been invited. Amelia stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in surprise. James looked equally stunned, though his expression quickly softened into one of amusement. "What on earth?" Sophie whispered, glancing at Amelia. The dog, seemingly unfazed by the stares and whispers, reached the middle of the aisle and sat down, its head tilted as it gazed up at Amelia. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if sensing the tension in the air, the dog let out a single bark, a sound so clear and earnest that it broke through the silence like a bell. A wave of laughter rippled through the guests, easing the awkwardness of the situation. Amelia couldn't help but smile. She crouched down, her white gown pooling around her as she extended a hand toward the dog. "Well, hello there," she said softly. The dog wagged its tail enthusiastically, taking a tentative step forward before nuzzling her hand. Its eyes were bright and intelligent, and there was a gentleness in its demeanor that tugged at Amelia's heart. James stepped down from the altar, walking toward Amelia with a curious smile. "Looks like we've got an uninvited guest," he said. "Maybe not," Amelia replied, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Maybe he's exactly where he's supposed to be." The dog barked again, a cheerful sound that seemed to echo Amelia's sentiment. The crowd erupted into a mix of laughter and applause, the tension of the interruption melting away. James reached out to pat the dog's head, and the three of them stood there in the middle of the aisle, an unexpected but heartwarming tableau. "Should we continue?" Sophie asked, her voice laced with both confusion and amusement. Amelia glanced at James, then at the dog. "I think we need to figure out what he wants first." James nodded in agreement. "He certainly seems like he has a purpose." The dog seemed to understand their words. It barked once more, then turned and began trotting back down the aisle, stopping at the edge of the garden where the trees cast long shadows on the grass. It looked back at them, as if urging them to follow. A murmur of curiosity spread through the guests. Amelia and James exchanged a glance, their connection so strong that no words were needed. Hand in hand, they began to follow the dog, their guests rising from their seats to watch. The dog led them through the garden, its movements purposeful yet unhurried. It stopped near the base of a large oak tree, sniffing at the ground before pawing at the soft earth. Amelia and James approached cautiously, the guests trailing behind them at a respectful distance. "What is it?" James asked, crouching beside the dog. It barked softly and continued pawing at the ground. Amelia knelt beside them, her gown brushing against the grass. She gently pushed aside some of the dirt with her hands, her heart pounding as she uncovered what appeared to be an old wooden box, its edges weathered and cracked with age. The crowd gasped in unison as James carefully lifted the box from the ground. It was light, as if whatever was inside had long since lost its weight. He opened the lid, revealing a stack of letters tied together with a faded ribbon, along with a small locket that glinted in the sunlight. Amelia reached for one of the letters, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. The paper was fragile, the ink faded but still legible. Her voice quavered as she read aloud. "To the love of my life, though time and distance may separate us, my heart will always belong to you. One day, I hope this will find its way to you, just as my love always has. Until then, I remain yours forever." Tears filled Amelia's eyes as she finished reading. The guests stood in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the emotion of the moment. The dog sat quietly beside her, its tail wagging as if it knew the significance of the discovery. "Who wrote these?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Amelia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But it feels like they were meant to be found today." The locket, when opened, revealed a black and white photograph of a young couple smiling brightly at the camera. The resemblance to Amelia's family was uncanny. The woman in the photo bore a striking likeness to her late grandmother. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched the locket tightly. "This was hers," she whispered. "My grandmother. She must have buried this here long ago." James placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's like she's here with us," he said softly, "watching over us." Amelia nodded, overcome with emotion. The stray dog, their unexpected guest, had led them to a piece of her family's history, a moment of love and connection that transcended time. The guests remained silent, their curiosity and emotions palpable as they watched Amelia clutch the locket tightly. The stray dog sat at her feet, its tail wagging gently, as if it knew the significance of what had just been uncovered. James knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, offering quiet support. Amelia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I used to hear stories about my grandmother and the great love of her life. She always told me they shared a bond that couldn't be broken, even by time or distance. I never thought," her voice broke, and she took a deep breath. "I never thought I'd find something like this. Here, of all places." James looked at the letters in the box, carefully untying the ribbon that held them together. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but the words were still clear. Each letter was filled with declarations of love and promises of reunion, written with a sincerity that seemed to echo through the years. Amelia reached for another letter, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. "Listen to this," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Even if we are separated by 1,000 miles or 100 lifetimes, I will find my way back to you. You are my home, my heart, my everything." The guests murmured softly, many of them dabbing at their eyes. The heartfelt words seemed to resonate with everyone present, as if they had tapped into a universal truth about love and its enduring power. James cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's incredible that these letters survived all these years. Your grandmother must have buried them here for a reason." Amelia nodded, her gaze shifting to the dog. "And this little one, it's like he knew they were here. He led us straight to them." The dog barked softly, wagging its tail as it looked up at Amelia with bright, intelligent eyes. There was something almost otherworldly about its demeanor, as if it understood the weight of the moment. The guests began to gather closer, their curiosity getting the better of them. Sophie, the maid of honor, stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. "Amelia," she said softly, "this feels like a sign, like your grandmother is here with you, blessing your wedding in the most unexpected way." Amelia's tears flowed freely now, but they were no longer just tears of sadness or nostalgia. They were tears of gratitude and love, of feeling connected to something greater than herself. She looked at James, her heart swelling with emotion. This day was already perfect, but now it feels magical. James smiled, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's like your grandmother found a way to be here, even though she's gone. And this little guy," he gestured to the dog, "was her messenger." The dog barked again, its tail wagging furiously as if it agreed. The crowd laughed softly, the tension of the moment easing into something warm and joyful. Someone suggested giving the dog a plate of food, and Sophie quickly obliged, bringing out a small dish of leftover hors d'oeuvres. The dog ate happily, its tail wagging the whole time, much to the delight of the guests. As the afternoon turned into evening, the mood shifted back to celebration. The guests returned to their seats, and the ceremony resumed under the soft glow of the setting sun. But the discovery of the letters and the locket had changed something. There was a deeper sense of connection, not just between Amelia and James, but among everyone present. It was as if the stray dog had brought more than just an interruption. It had brought a reminder of love's enduring power. After the ceremony, as the newlyweds shared their first dance under the twinkling fairy lights, the dog lay peacefully by the edge of the dance floor, its head resting on its paws. Amelia and James couldn't help but smile as they glanced over at their unexpected guest, who had become a part of their story in the most extraordinary way. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and the guests began to leave, Amelia knelt beside the dog, scratching behind its ears. "I don't know where you came from," she said softly, "but you brought us something priceless." "Thank you." James joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Do you think he has a home?" he asked. Amelia shook her head. "I don't think so. But maybe he does now." The dog barked softly, its tail wagging as if to say, "Yes, I'm home." The days that followed were filled with more discoveries. Amelia spent hours poring over the letters, piecing together the story of her grandmother's great love. The locket, when cleaned and polished, revealed a small engraving on the back, "Forever yours, H." Amelia remembered her grandmother speaking fondly of a man named Henry, a love she had lost during her youth. The details had always been vague, shrouded in the haze of memory and time, but the letters brought it all to life. Henry had been her soulmate, the person who had inspired her to believe in love and its infinite possibilities. As for the dog, whom they had named Lucky, he quickly became a beloved member of the family. He seemed to thrive in his new home, as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. Wherever Amelia and James went, Lucky followed, his presence a constant reminder of the serendipity that had brought them together. One afternoon, as Amelia sat in the garden reading one of the letters, she felt a gentle nudge at her elbow. She looked down to see Lucky staring up at her, a small stick in his mouth. She smiled, taking the stick from him and scratching behind his ears. "What is it, boy?" she asked. "Do you have another secret for me?" Lucky barked, his tail wagging as he trotted off toward the oak tree where they had found the box. Amelia followed him, heart racing with anticipation. She didn't know if there was more to uncover, but one thing was certain: Lucky's presence had changed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. As she stood beneath the tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her grandmother's love story had been lost to time, but now it was alive again, woven into the fabric of her own life. And Lucky, the stray who had wandered into her wedding, had been the one to bring it all together. Amelia knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his scruffy frame. "You're not just lucky," she said softly. "You're a miracle." Lucky barked again, his tail wagging furiously, as if he understood every word.